Most of the video you're about to watch is re-edited from Instagram uploads I did just before starting this channel, so please forgive the quality. Hopefully when you're done, you'll have learned something, maybe be inspired to upgrade your own suspension. Along the way, I'll interject with some clarifications and updates of things I've learned since doing the modification over the last couple of weeks. Let's get into it. Behind me is Emulators. It's my daily ride. It's the first bike I built, starting with a 2004 Honda VLX 600. And this is what it looked like before. This is what it looks like now. As you can see, I've made a few modifications. Today, we're going to be working on Phaedrus, the bobber, and we're going to be doing a suspension upgrade on this. It's my daily ride for the last 4 or 5 years, and that's mostly city traffic that I ride in. Down here in Atlanta, some of the roads are notoriously bad. Plus, I just want to upgrade my suspension because it's a non-tunable, old school fork suspension. Okay, so now we've got the damping rod, and what this does in a old style motorcycles that still use this is it sits down in the bottom of the fork tube, and if you can see this little ring around here creates a seal. So you have a chamber down here full of oil, and chamber above it which is partially full of oil, and spring sits on top. So when your forks compress and push down, and the fork tube slides into that lower section, past here, slides down in, creates pressure, and that forces oil through these holes here, up and out the top. And the process, only so much oil can go through those holes, and so when it comes down really fast, it creates a lot of pressure, which then slows the travel of the forks. But no matter how fast the fork is traveling, a fixed amount of oil can go through here. So when you hit that maximum amount, basically the fork stops, and then like you hit a bump or a pothole or something and forks to move really quickly, the fork stops. When I was damper, this is going to fit on top here like this, and then cover up that hole, and then the little holes in top of the emulator will allow slow travel, and then when you hit something big and you need a lot of motion, this will open up, the spring will compress, a larger hole will open up, and more oil will be able to go through. So the reason I had to take this out is to modify it to basically increase the size of these holes in the damping rod and add 2 more to basically create so much oil flow down here that this is negated. It no longer works as designed by the factory, so that this can take over the job. Like I said before, so this is the stock spring. I'm going to put this back in today. I've got new springs coming in the next week. I'm going to ride it with the stock springs. Now I'm going to drill these out, and I'll come back and talk to you then. Alright everybody, so here's the drilled out dampening rod. So I had 4 holes, I enlarged those and then added 2 more according to the specs from Race Tech for this particular bike in this application. So now it's time to reassemble. Just took it for a spin, put about 25 miles on her, city and highway, and definitely massive improvement in the comfort of the ride. Just doesn't feel the vibration in my hands as much. Under hard braking, it just feels more controlled, more stable. And on the highway, where we have around the highway near my house, we've got all of the concrete poured highway, so it's got all those kind of regular bumps in it, and it's a million times smoother and just nicer ride. So definitely can recommend the Emulators. It was a pretty easy install. Like I said, right now I've got the stock springs in there, so the preload is a little high, a little bit higher than it should be. New springs coming next week, so I'm going to ride it for about a week, and then I'll drop those in. Those were real easy. All I got to do to drop those in is literally, I'll just remove this cap. Let's see here. You can see that. Remove this cap, pull the spring out, drop the new spring in, and put the cap back on. And that's all it takes to do the new springs. So that's it. So definitely recommend the Racetech emulators. Hey everybody, Charles from Basil Built. If you really enjoy these videos that I'm doing, if you learn something from them, if you're entertained by them, if you're inspired by them, please like it, hit the subscribe button, hit notifications so you know when new videos are up. I have a brand new channel. My goal right now is to hit that 100 subscribers so that I can get my name in the URL box above here. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it would really help me out. And back to the video. Springs, the stiffer springs from Racetech have arrived. Is springs themselves. In this case, these are 0.8 kilogram / millimeter springs. What that means is for every 0.8 kilograms, they compress 1 millimeter. Instructions gives you a little bit of information. It says preload must be set up. The springs in this kit may not be the same length as stock. Spacer material can be aluminum, steel, or Schedule 40 PVC. Yes, PVC is plenty strong. Available at your local hardware store. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the stock springs out and then stick these springs in. Check the preload, get that adjusted to what I want it to be, and then it's off to the races. We're going to take a ride and see how much that changes the fork adjustment or the fork travel and the overall feel and performance on the bike. So we'll see you in a little bit. Now, as you can see, stock spring is progressive. It's got tight coils on one end, wider space coils at the bottom. The Racetech spring is consistent. It's all the way the same all the way through. Also, the Racetech coil is longer. So in that case, that means I'm going to definitely have to shorten my spacers on my bike. My Racetech specs call for a 15 millimeter preload, so with a longer spring, I'm definitely gonna have to cut these down. So the bottom of the cap where it meets the top of the forks needs to be 15 millimeters. So allow for all of that and cut this piece to fit. So that's what I'm gonna do, stick it in. Unfortunately, I don't have a camera system where I can set up and do like a time lapse or anything with that. So, but you just follow along. You understand, it's, you know, cut a piece of PVC pipe. It's not that hard. Back from a test ride. Yes, I did not take measurements from the full stock setup. So the other day I installed the emulators and I took measurements from that, rode the bike with that, got my impressions of that. Then I took measurements with the new springs and took that for a ride. So here's what I got. With the emulators and stock shocks, or stock springs, I had 48 millimeters of sag when I'm sitting on the bike. Real quick interjection here. I just mentioned sag. Sag is where the suspension sits when you sit on the motorcycle. So between fully extended and fully compressed, when you sit on the motorcycle, it's partly compressed. And dialing in exactly where that is tells you how much suspension you have left to compress when you hit a bump and how much you have left to extend when you go over a dip. So in this case, if you usually want to set it around 1/3 of the total travel. So if you have 100 millimeters of total travel, you'd want to set the suspension at 33 millimeters of travel. So you would have 33 millimeters to extend into dips and 66 millimeters to compress over bumps. Exactly where you want that is a personal thing, but that's basically what sag is. And with the emulators and Racetech springs, I had 33 millimeters of sag. So took a big chunk of the sag out, almost 1/3 of the sag out, keeping me, and now I keep in mind that I have a total of 130 millimeters of travel. So basically it gives me almost a full 100 millimeters of travel to play with actually on the road over the first setup. Now I took it for a ride and went all the way to work and all the way back with a little jaunt on the highway for about 2 miles, which is my normal ride to work. It's city streets. It's got a lot of curves and hills. It's Atlanta, so it's not the best roads. Emulator and stock springs using 124 millimeters of travel out of a possible 130 millimeters. So almost all of my travel was being used. It didn't leave me much to play with in case of an emergency, hard braking, anything like that. After upgrading to the stiffer springs, I'm using 97 millimeters of travel, which is leaving me 33 millimeters of travel to play with, so that's a whole lot more. Everything feels smoother. The bike just feels more grounded, more connected to the road. Everything feels smoother. Two of the things that I noticed that made a huge difference to me is one, the brake dive is significantly less. Coming into a turn, like a corner where I'm going to slow down and then turn, I find myself not worrying so much about looking immediately in front of me. I more easily look further ahead, which means it makes the turns easier. And then the other thing I noticed was, like I said, there's a lot of curves going to and from work on my route, and I drive them 200 days a year for the last 2 years. And glancing down at my speedometer, going through those curves, just going by feel, and then glancing down, I was noticing I was taking anywhere from 5 to 10 miles an hour faster. So I'm not pushing it, I'm not trying to race it, I'm not trying to like drag a knee, I'm not doing anything like that, but just what feels comfortable was faster. I just had that much more confidence in the bike. It feels better, it gives me more confidence riding it, and it just performs better, so that I just feel more in control, I feel more at one with the bike. It's just there, it's exactly where I need it to be. So bottom line, absolutely, if you have an old school bike using damper rod suspension and you want to just improve that, get a better ride without having to spend a fortune upgrading completely new forks to cartridge forks. Stiffer springs, Race Cycle do stiffer springs, or depending on your bike, a little over $100. And the emulators control the damping and make the whole thing way more tunable. I would absolutely recommend it. Do it. It's worth it. All in, I've got less than $250 in here. 2.5, 3 hours worth of work. If you're competent with tools, definitely worth doing. I would highly recommend it. It's it feels like a whole new bike. So can't wait to get the KZ set up and running in the next couple months here, and I will absolutely be putting Racetech springs and emulators into the KZ, because springs and shocks from 1978 original, probably pretty blown anyway, and definitely not state of the art, so definitely some updates on that. All right, cool. You guys have a good one. Talk to you later.